A federal notice called him Native American, and still culturally unidentifiable. He had been removed from a small Nevada rock shelter in 1940, then dated to roughly 10,600 years old. 76 years after removal, legal control passed to the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe. Why did the journey home take so long? Because the answer passed through a museum, a court, and destructive DNA testing, and still required a legal distinction that most simple versions leave out. The notice did not describe one isolated body. It listed the remains of at least 4 individuals and 10 associated funerary objects from Spirit Cave. Their dates were not all the same, and the record does not support burying them together in one imagined scene. Our central trace is burial number 2, a well-preserved, partially mummified adult man wrapped with funerary material. Over 76 years, institutions gave him a succession of meanings. He was an excavated burial, a fair exhibit, a museum holding, a scientific rarity, a contested NAGPRA case, and, for the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe, an ancestor waiting to return. Every label opened one kind of action and closed another. To understand the delay, we have to follow those labels through the people and institutions allowed to apply them. Spirit Cave is not the vast underground chamber its name may suggest. It is a small rock shelter in western Nevada, in the Lahontan Basin. In August 1940, Sidney and Georgia Wheeler worked there during a salvage excavation. Their field record describes an upper burial, and, beneath it, burial number 2. They documented a body wrapped in tulle matting, with moccasins, a rabbit skin blanket, and woven bags among the funerary material. Then, the burial left the shelter. We do not need to invent what the Wheelers felt when they exposed it. The documented action is enough. A person who had been placed in the earth was separated from that place and entered a new chain of custody. The field notes preserved details. Removal also changed the authority around those details. From that point forward, access, study, display, and classification would be decided somewhere else. Later in 1940, material from Spirit Cave was displayed at the Nevada State Fair. Afterward, it entered the Nevada State Museum collection. That sequence is uncomfortable on its own terms. Public display and museum curation were documented practices, and the burial remained in institutional care for decades. Museum custody did preserve the field record and the physical material that later researchers could re-examine. It also concentrated decision-making. The burial could be cataloged, stored, displayed, or sampled because an institution held it. The people who regarded him as an ancestor did not control those choices. Preservation and displacement were therefore not opposite stories. For much of the 20th century, they were happening to the same remains at the same time. The early estimate made burial number 2 seem old, but not exceptional, perhaps 1,500 to 2,000 years. That number settled over the collection like an ordinary catalog fact. It affected what people thought they had, how urgently they studied it, and where it sat within the larger history of North America. A wrong estimate did not destroy the evidence. It delayed recognition of what the evidence contained. In the 1990s, museum personnel submitted hair and bone samples for accelerator mass spectrometry dating. The results did not merely adjust the old estimate. They displaced it by thousands of years. Measurements placed the burial beyond 9,400 radiocarbon years. In official federal language published in 2016, the Spirit Cave assemblage included dates reaching roughly 10,600 years. That was the age shock. An object held for decades as a comparatively recent burial became an extraordinarily early, well-preserved burial. The scientific stakes rose because it could carry information about early life, technology, population history, and the settlement of the continent. But scientific value did not create a path home. It made control of the remains more consequential. Notice what the new date did. It did not change the material in the museum. It changed what institutions believed the material could answer. Hair, bone, woven objects, and field notes that had already survived for decades now became evidence for questions reaching back toward the earliest known people on the continent. The same redating that corrected an old mistake also raised the perceived cost of surrendering scientific access. If you value American history built from field records, court findings, and the limits of what those records can prove, subscribe. This channel follows the trace before it follows the legend. The number in the title needs one careful distinction. 10,600 years is the official figure used in the 2016 federal record. The original 1990s measurements were expressed in radiocarbon years, which are not identical to calendar years. A 2025 synthesis using later calibration describes the burial as older than 10,700 years and gives a median date of 8,998 BC across 7 dates. Those formulations are not interchangeable, but they are not rival stories either. They reflect different dating conventions and later calibration. The honest conclusion is simple. The burial was somewhat older than the famous official number, not younger. The redating changed more than an archaeological timeline. It increased the scientific demand placed on a human burial at the same time that federal law was changing the obligations of museums and agencies holding Native American remains. In March 1997, the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe formally asserted a claim under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. The tribe regarded the Spirit Cave individual as an ancestor from its Aboriginal homeland. That claim came years before the later DNA work. Keep that order in mind. The relationship claimed by the tribe was not discovered in a laboratory. By then, the burial had acquired two meanings that could pull in opposite directions. To researchers, its age made it unusually valuable evidence about early North America. To the tribe, it was not a rare specimen waiting for a better test. It was an ancestor whose removal and continuing custody had not ended the original relationship. NAGPRA required federal officials to make distinctions that sound simple until the evidence is 11 millennia old. Were the remains Native American under the law? Could a shared group identity be reasonably traced between the ancient remains and a present-day tribe? And if cultural affiliation could not be established under that standard, what rules controlled disposition? Different kinds of evidence entered those questions. Archaeology could compare objects, technologies, and regional sequences. Geography could locate the rockshelter within an Aboriginal homeland. Physical anthropology and, later, genetics could describe biological relationships at different scales. Oral history and tribal knowledge carried continuity through a living community. These sources did not ask the same question or produce the same kind of answer. Yet, an agency still had to decide how much each would count. In 2000, the Bureau of Land Management concluded that the Spirit Cave remains were Native American. But under its analysis, the agency did not find cultural affiliation with a living tribe. That was not a finding that the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe had no relationship to the ancestor. It was a finding that the relationship had not been demonstrated within the agency's framework. This is where power in the case becomes visible. It did not appear only in a courtroom or in possession of the museum keys. It also sat inside the definition of acceptable proof. The institution making the decision was also deciding which evidence could carry the most weight. The Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe challenged that result. In 2001, the Federal NAGPRA Review Committee examined the dispute. By a vote of 6-1, the committee concluded that BLM had not fairly and objectively considered all relevant information. It supported Northern Paiute affiliation. That vote mattered, but it was advisory. It did not move the ancestor out of museum custody, and BLM retained its contrary determination. One federal body had said the evidence was weighed unfairly and supported Northern Paiute affiliation. The agency responsible for disposition had not changed its answer. The committee could expose the gate, but it could not open it. The dispute reached federal court. In 2006, the court found BLM's handling of contrary evidence arbitrary and capricious. That phrase has real force in administrative law, but it should not be made to say more than it did. The court did not prove a conspiracy. It did not decide that every BLM conclusion was false, and it did not order immediate repatriation. It required the agency to weigh the evidence more fully and explain its reasoning properly. So even a legal victory did not end the custody chain. The case had exposed a defect in how evidence was considered, but correcting a method is not the same as producing an instant decision. The ancestor remained within the institutional process. The calendar matters here. 9 years had passed between the tribe's formal claim and the court ruling. 10 more would pass before transfer. Every additional standard, reconsideration, and proposed method operated on paperwork inside the agencies. Its duration was lived outside them by a community still seeking the return of an ancestor. There is a fair complication here. Tracing legal cultural affiliation across roughly 11,000 years from a small assemblage is genuinely difficult. Archaeological cultures do not map neatly onto modern political identities. Genes do not carry tribal citizenship, language, or a person's name. Oral histories do not arrive in the form of laboratory measurements. Acknowledging that difficulty does not erase the court's criticism. It makes the criticism more precise. When the evidence is difficult, the rules for weighing it matter more, not less. The claimant in this story was not a vanished people represented only by artifacts. The Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe was, and remains, a living government and community. Its present-day Tribal Historical Preservation Office works to identify, preserve, and protect Paiute and Shoshone cultural heritage. The Spirit Cave claim was therefore not an argument between modern science and an extinct culture. It was a dispute involving a living nation, a federal agency, a museum collection, and an ancestor held away from the place where he had been buried. After the court ruling, another form of evidence came under discussion: ancient DNA. It promised information unavailable to the 1940 excavators or the researchers who first estimated the burial's age. It also required taking material from the remains. The Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe initially refused destructive DNA testing. The record does not give us a private council debate, and it does not authorize one to be invented. The refusal leaves a precise question hanging over the case. Would the tribe permit material to be taken from an ancestor while the return claim remained unresolved? Consultation then moved through 2 documented places. At the entrance to Spirit Cave, a published photograph records tribal representatives and researchers together. Tribal representatives later visited the ancient DNA facilities in Copenhagen. No transcript is needed. The locations and sequence carry the pressure. The discussion had moved from the place of burial to a laboratory built to extract another category of evidence, while the decision itself remained open. After repeated consultation and the laboratory visit, the tribe permitted limited destructive analysis. Destructive is not dramatic decoration. It names the physical limit of the method. Material removed for testing cannot be restored to the remains. A scientific result can be copied. The sampled material is consumed once. Here, the burden of proof became physical. While the return claim remained unresolved, another category of evidence could be produced only by altering the ancestor himself. That does not make the test the cause of the return. It makes the cost of the tribe's decision visible. The genome could add information, but the sampled material would not come back. The genetic work placed the Spirit Cave individual closer to Native Americans than to any other population used in the comparison. In the 2018 science study, his genome was one of 15 ancient American genomes used to model early population branching and dispersal. That is a significant result. It is also a bounded one. A genome can locate an individual within broad population history. It cannot recover his name, tell us what language he spoke, certify tribal citizenship, or establish an exclusive relationship with one modern nation. The DNA supported Native American ancestry. It did not turn 11,000 years of human history into a single modern label. Now return to the federal notice from the opening. In October 2016, after the genetic analysis, BLM still stated that a shared group identity could not be reasonably traced between the remains and any present-day tribe. If this were the simple story, DNA identified the man, the agency accepted that identity, and the remains went home. The notice should end there. It does not. The same notice identified Spirit Cave as lying on northern Paiute Aboriginal land. Under the federal rule governing culturally unidentifiable Native American remains, disposition to the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe could proceed on that basis. 3 questions that had been compressed into one, now separate. Ancestry asked where the individual belonged within broad population history. Cultural affiliation asked whether a shared group identity could be traced under NAGPRA to a present-day tribe. Disposition asked who could receive remains when that second finding remained unresolved. The DNA informed the first question. BLM still declined to affirm the second. The law supplied a route through the third. Power had been hiding in those categories. The case did not end because one test finally answered every question. It ended when the process no longer required every form of relationship to be collapsed into a single kind of proof. On November 18, 2016, the Bureau of Land Management transferred full legal control of the Spirit Cave, human remains, and funerary objects to the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe. The federal announcement came 76 years after the 1940 removal. Later, peer-reviewed accounts confirmed that the ancestor was returned and reburied. The delay was not one locked door. It was a chain. An early misdating, public display, museum curation, scientific redating, a tribal claim, an agency framework, a 6-to-1 review finding, a court-identified defect, consultation over destructive testing, a bounded genetic result, and finally, a different legal route. Some links reflect the genuine difficulty of deep history. Others record decisions that failed scrutiny. The documented chain is troubling without turning it into a conspiracy. The 2025 synthesis adds another layer, but it must remain properly attributed. Its authors, including indigenous co-authors and a former Fallon Paiute-Shoshone chair, argue for deep continuity through the Lahontan Basin and strongly suggest continuity to modern Paiute communities. That argument draws on genetics, archaeology, radiocarbon evidence, oral history, and survivance. It is not an exclusive DNA certificate, and it does not rewrite the narrower wording of the 2016 legal notice. The tribe does not need to be frozen in an ancient frame for that continuity to matter. It remains a living community with institutions responsible for cultural stewardship in the present. The return closed the custody question. It did not close every scholarly question about 11,000 years of population history, and it did not need to. Look once more at the language of the 2016 record. Shared group identity could not be reasonably traced. Disposition could proceed. Between those two lines sits almost the entire story. A relationship asserted long before DNA, evidence weighed and challenged, a sample consumed, and a legal route that finally allowed the ancestor to leave federal control. The public record confirms the transfer and the reburial. It does not provide a publication-worthy reburial location, and it does not give us permission to reconstruct a private ceremony. That boundary is not a missing clue. It is where this investigation should stop. Spirit Cave remains a small opening in the Nevada rock. In 1940, the documentary trail moved outward from that shelter to a fair, a museum, a laboratory, a court, and a federal notice. 76 years later, the trail turned back toward the Fallon Paiute-Shoshone Tribe. Then, at last, the public record stops following the ancestor.